Today I wanted to talk about the five forces facing the food industry. Actually, in the original version of this there was another F, but being the politically correct town that it is, I took it out, but it actually does better express how I felt about it. Today I want to explain a bit about the interconnecting five forces. I do apologise for any Michael Porter tragics who have his book by his bed, but it does suit me to use the five forces model. Basically, there are five forces that are driving the structural change in the food industry. They're interlinked and they're causing major shifts. The industry is undergoing the biggest shift in its history, and the point I want to make is it's structural and not cyclical. So agriculture is very cyclical, but this is structural. So we're going to see a very different food industry in 5 years' time than we have now, and we won't go back to the good old days. In conferences like this for years we talk about building value in agriculture, but what's happening in agriculture and food at the moment is that our categories are being devalued. So 50% of food now in supermarkets is sold on special, on sale. Category values are being destroyed. The profitability of processors is declining rapidly, to many to the extent where it's negative. Multinationals are rethinking their Australian strategies. SMEs are a threatened species. Last week Unibic went into receivership. There's probably one of those every week. And yet some of the gourmet small companies are actually flourishing. But a bit of background as to how the food industry is set up. And I'm using the dairy industry as an example. Basically, the food industry comprises the big multinationals like a Nestle, the SMEs, the mainly family companies like the Bullers, and then you've got the boutiques like the Meredith Dairy. Global conglomerates, most categories are dominated by global conglomerates. They're multinational, they're diverse category mix, so they're in a lot of different categories. They're multi-channel, so they're food service and supermarket and non-supermarket. They've got global super brands and global marketing strategies, global production footprints, increasingly in Asia. They're listed overseas, not accountable to the Australian stock market. They're well capitalised and they're able to capitalise on the Asian growth. SMEs, which are the bulk of the industry, if you look at quantitatively, the bulk of the food industry is delivered by a whole lot of SMEs, some of them not too small, but they're little companies in back suburbs and country towns and whatever that are the bulk of the food industry. They turn over anywhere between 10 to 300 million. They're family or privately owned, very narrow product ranges, sort of regionally focused. Their brands are okay but not great. And usually they sort of outgrow the family structure in the second or third generation. The third thing are the boutique specialists, and they're micro businesses, less than 10 million. They're highly specialised product ranges. They're very passionate about their product, and their growth is often limited by their capital. So that's a bit of background to that. The food moves to the market via 5 channels. The supermarkets, which is a dominant channel, about 70 or 80% of food, especially independent retailers and markets, food service, which is the food we eat away from home, online, which is increasingly channel, and ingredients and value-added commodities. I just want to talk about online momentarily. The Nescafe is a good example of, or the Nespresso is a good example of food going to market in a separate channel. That's become a mainstream channel. It's taken them 20 years to get there, but now they bypass the other channels. Getting back to the food supermarket sector, 2 supermarkets now control 80% of the retail channel, Coles and Woolworths. The farmers' markets are in decline. They're building a new farmers' wholesale market in Melbourne. God knows why, because they won't be using it, I don't think, because most of the food is now bypassing those markets. Most of the categories are dominated by big multinationals, the billion-dollar club. So these are the overseas-owned companies, some of them family companies, very large. So that's a bit of background as to how the food industry is set up. But I just want to talk a bit more about the theme of the thing, which is the 5 forces at play. So there's 5 forces that are driving change. It's the supermarket oligopsony, it's the private label renaissance, it's corporatisation in supply chains, it's the high value, high Australian dollar, and it's the food deflation factor. I'll talk a bit about supermarket oligopsony. For those of you here last year, I sort of focused on this a bit. It is a major issue, it's in the paper every day, but the 2 supermarkets have immense power. most food businesses are heavily reliant on them, and therefore they have to negotiate with them, and therefore they're at a huge disadvantage. So it's really like playing poker with the devil to some extent. It's really, you can't really win. It's rolling the dice, and you just hope you survive. There's a big head-to-head battle going on between Coles and Woolworths. Woolworths led for years. Coles came along with a new management team, got their act together. So there's now a real aggressive price war going on. They're using their negotiating power to get prices down. They're restructuring supply chains. They're dramatically changing their ranging policy, so they're reducing the amount of product in the range on offer, and usually a lot of it is private label. Everyday low prices and deep discounts, and basically just a very aggressive situation. Excuse me. The second year's players, though, the Aldi's and Costco, are really establishing new frontiers. So they're only small players, less than 10% of the market between them, but they're going with price leadership, so they're very deep discounters, very narrow range, very strong private label offering, and opportunistic ranging, so they offer things, seasonal things and so forth. Metcash, which is the independent set, the IGAs, they're struggling, they've lost market share, and they're becoming quite aggressive to try and maintain their position. So they're going back to the suppliers and really putting a lot of pressure on them as well. There's a great quote from the global chair from Heinz, who said the Australian market's the worst he's ever worked in. It's just a really tough market. The next force I want to talk about is the private label renaissance. I talk about it as a renaissance because private label's been around for 30 years, but it was very hit and miss, very patchy quality, no real brand equity, no real marketing behind it. But recently they really lifted their game. And private label's having a major impact on food processors. It's now a very big part of the business. It's about 25% of the total sale. They're taking shelf space off proprietary lines. So what they're doing is they're taking off the second and third brands and replacing them with private labels. So those second and third brands don't have a place to go. But also the proprietary brands that do remain on the shelf have to drop their prices to maintain their turnover. And then there's a lot of discounting going on at that end. And also consumers are now starting to take it up as a clever choice. So it's now becoming a fairly serious threat. Again, the other point that the Heinz chair made is that ultimately our products are going to become devalued because of the need for manufacturers to keep their prices down to maintain their position. Private label is about 25% of the market here. In the US it's a third, in the UK it's a half, and I think it will head towards the half in 5 years' time here. They really lifted their game. This is the Woolworths offering. They've got 3 different levels. It's very good quality. It's supported with good brand marketing. Quality is excellent, and consumers said is a clever choice. An example of good private label is Valrhona chocolate, which sells in Simon Johnson for $21 a block, and this is Aldi's for $2.49, similar quality. So private labels come a long way in offering value to the consumers. When private label first started, the processors quite liked it because they could use it as a way to run their factories a bit longer and recover some overheads. And so it was pretty good. So even though they didn't make a lot of money out of it, it actually covered some overheads. But when it gets to 20%, it really is eating into profit. And when it gets into 30%, it's really, really killing them. So that whole mix has changed, and so too is the profitability of the food companies. But the other point I'd make is you need really strong proprietary brands to drive innovation and marketing. So companies take the profit they make out of their brands to invest in marketing and brand development and product development. So the next generation of products is in the pipeline, but because that profit is no longer there, that next generation of products is still in the pipeline, and their ability to defend themselves is weakened, so it's going to have a major longer term impact. The third factor is food deflation, and as I said before, our value of our food is now declining rapidly. We're paying less for food than we used to pay. The cost, food companies can no longer pass on their cost increases, which are substantial, because of the bargaining power. So they go along to Coles and Woolworths and they negotiate their prices down, not up. So the significant raw material prices increases because of global demand, and also, you know, the weather and so forth that disrupts supply chains. Freight and logistics is really important, and growing energy, labour, compliance, insurance, they're all increasing, but the ability to pass those on is not. In virtually every category, the sell prices have declined significantly, the cost of driven, so the margins are sort of getting narrower and narrower.